Hello, I'm Marion. We are waiting for Devita Davison, Executive Director, FoodLab, Detroit in the USA, so far from Paris. That's why we're waiting for our third guest, but she's coming soon. Welcome to you, guest, first on this first discussion together dedicated to the city. Elisabeth Laville, founder and CEO of Utopies. Utopia, I love this word. This word is really not so common. Finally, we need utopia. Can you tell us more about Utopies? What's going on? After we will introduce Jean-Louis, of course.
Yeah, well, you know, Nicolas Hulot said when he left the Ministry of Ecology, le temps de l'utopie est décrété. Yeah, well, Utopies was created 25 years ago, and it's both a think tank and a consultancy specializing in sustainability strategies and positive brand strategies.
Sure, and Jean-Louis Missika, of course. Hello. A lot of people know Jean-Louis. Who knows Jean-Louis Missika? In this room, come on, wake up, people. Thank you. Jean-Louis Missika, Deputy Mayor of Paris, of course, working very closely with Anne Hidalgo, Mayor of Paris. How do you feel this morning?
I feel well.
Yes, yeah. Great place.
The weather is nice and the place is great. And
sure.
We are in Le Louvre.
Exactly, nice place. Let's talk about the city and how the city need to be transformed into being a great place to create and for brands to be a very creative place once again. Maybe first question for you, Jean-Louis. How do you feel with the city engaging citizens, consumers, and largely all the different parties maybe taking the keys of the city? What about this new vision of a city more open? And of course, let's talk about Paris. How do you involve the citizens and the consumers concretely?
Well, first of all, I think that the climate crisis is not a crisis as usual. It's something different. And in Paris, but I think it's the same thing in all the cities. You have the consequences of the climate crisis, but you have also the democratic crisis. You have the pollution problem, you have the congestion problem, you have the social discrimination and segregation problem, you have all the migrants problem. I think that all these problems are related one with another and have something to do with the climate crisis. And what we have to do is to act in different ways. For example, for citizenry, for the citizenship, we have created the participatory budget, one of the biggest participatory budget of the planet, $500 million during the term. And we ask Parisians to vote, to propose projects, local projects, but also big projects for Paris. And we ask them to design these projects and to vote for these projects, and we implement the project. So it's a way of participative democracy, a way of sharing not only the power, but the decision to do things. And I think, for example, the overwhelming votes in favor of greening the city is a good indicator, a good clue of what's important for the city and the citizen. This is for the citizen. After that, the question is, how do you make the companies able to be part of the project? You know, the frontier between public and private sector is of course, does exist. But now the problem is what we call common goods, commons. And the commons are, you need to have a governance of these commons shared by the public and the private sector, the private companies and the cities and the governments, local governments.
How does it sound to you, Elisabeth? What's Jean-Louis?
Well, it's true that cities, in a way, concentrate a lot of issues in terms of sustainability, well, first they concentrate people. We have 50, pretty half the world population today living in cities, 75% in a few decades from now. Obviously, 70% of CO2 emissions rise in cities. So this is where the problem is, and the solution needs to be implemented as well. And 60% of GDP is in 600, I think, major cities in the world. So a lot of consumption is happening there too. So it makes sense for brands whenever they try to show that they want to be bold, as we said earlier, and bring a positive contribution to society. It makes sense to do it in cities. That's where most consumers live today. And that's where the problems are. Where if you think waste, mobility, health, food, whatever sustainability issues you can think of, and even climate change, which we could think of as a very global issue, happens locally. So if problems happen, the light needs to be where the darkness is. So if darkness is in cities, then the light needs to be, the solutions need to be implemented in cities. And obviously it makes a lot of sense for brands as well.
Sure. Utopies looking particularly at some trends, if I say so. But it's been 25 years that you are looking at how the city is transforming and engaging brands into the daily life. You have particularly screened on 3 main trends linked to the topic, how the city is engaging citizens and consumers. Can you just tell us more about different examples, like, a brand is engaging into the transformation of a city?
Yes, of course. Maybe something that needs to be said also is that Jean-Louis said that Paris citizens voted for greening the city. But when you look at expectations from stakeholders, a lot of them, 33%, and it's only 19% for the environment, say that their key expectation is on local contribution to local development. Okay, so the local dimension of it is very important. It's the first expectations from stakeholders towards brands or companies. So the 3 trends we've been studying, as far as brands getting involved in cities or with cities to solve sustainability issues and bring not only minimize their negative contribution, but bring a positive contribution to people. The first one is, especially for retailers, and I think we will discuss that right in the session after, it's how to turn retail stores into community hubs. Increasingly, we see retailers trying to provide free activities in addition to selling stuff, okay? Not only selling stuff, but using their stores to provide free activities. So there are a lot of examples. You can think of Lululemon, which is a yoga retailer, organizing free yoga classes in stores. You can think that Apple stores have launched 2 or 3 years ago a huge program called Today at Apple, where almost every day in every 500 Apple stores worldwide, you can have free sessions to learn music, photography, coding, whatever, for kids, adults, elderly, whoever you think you can think of. Uniqlo is doing the same with their stores. So increasingly, there is this idea that if you're a retailer, you just can't limit yourself to selling stuff. Selling stuff is not, and especially millennials, they want experience, they don't want products anymore. I mean, they want products, but with experience. Okay. Second trend is the idea of using local as a business model per se. Okay, so increasingly you see, of course, local brands, but also global brands trying to use local as a key idea for decision making. Okay, one example very interesting that I met when I was in Sustainable Brands in Detroit last year is Shinola. Shinola is started to say, okay, we're going to bring back jobs in the deprived city of Detroit. So first starting with to manufacture watches and creating 200 jobs, and then going to manufacturing bikes. I'm talking about Shinola.
To welcome
wonderful,
Devita.
Wonderful.
Applause, please, for Devita Davison from Detroit, USA.
Yes.
Hello.
I'm here in a flash, live from Detroit. No,
Don't worry.
continue. I love this.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, Shinola started with watches, and then the company, the brand became very successful, and then they could have decided to go elsewhere. They said, no, we're here to create jobs in Detroit, so we're going to now produce bikes, we're going to produce leather stuff, and now they've just opened a hotel, okay? So because their purpose, their business model is to create jobs locally. You can think of craft beers, very successful now. I read that in the US, craft beers will account for 1/4 of the market in a few years from now. So taking market shares from global brands that also strive to be local. Now they buy small local beers. You can think of new business model like Open Desk, which does office furniture online. So they sell you the design of the product, but you can make them have them produced by a craftsman near wherever you live in the world. Okay, so this is going very local in terms of business model. And the third trend is the one we will discuss on the Hub City at 11:15, is what we call local branding or brand urbanism. So meaning even very global brands are going very local, meaning they want to be close to their customers, so that's one reason for sure. But you can think, and they also say, if we want to be serious in addressing sustainability issues, we need maybe to have KPIs at global level if we're a global company, but we also need to implement solutions at the very local level. So you think Novo Nordisk, for example, #1 in the world in insulin against diabetes. They've launched a huge program called Cities Changing Diabetes, working with 8 or maybe more now pilot cities and a lot of partners to implement solutions, because if you want to fight diabetes tomorrow and not just sell medicines, then you need to act on what people eat and how people move. And this can be done only at city level, okay? So a lot of examples. Deluxe, who's doing painting, has a huge Let's Call program where they have clients, employees, everybody, and people from the communities volunteer to paint and bring joy and color in deprived cities. They started in the favelas in Rio, but they did it in Charleroi in Belgium. They do it in banlieue parisienne, etc. So a lot of initiatives today. Obviously, Nike in Portland, they finance the public bike system. So increasingly, companies and brands are trying to be useful in the city.
They create value more over their own value proposition and the DNA. Is it something that we could implement in Paris? I love these examples. You know, this is very pragmatic. How Domino's Pizza is
repairing
roads to better serve the clients. Should it be possible in Paris?
Yes, of course. We have already done a lot of things like that. You know, when you were speaking about urban planning and architecture, I think that what we have launched in Paris, 2 big tenders, 2 big competition. One is Reinventing Paris, and the other one is Pariculteur. Are good examples of working with private companies. With Reinventing Paris, we have decided to create a new way of building the city. Generally, when you sell a land, a public land, you sell to the highest bidder. And with Reinventing Paris, we have decided to sell it not to the highest bidder, but to the best project for the community. And it was a huge success, a worldwide success. And a lot of real estate companies have been obliged to rethink, to redesign their strategy in order to answer this kind of competition. And we have a lot of people, researchers, artists, startups, agricultures, working with architects and private sector real estate companies in order to design new kind of buildings and new kinds of piece of the cities. And with Pariculteur, it was the same kind of competition, but focused on greening the city, the terrace and the roofs of the city. We have already something like 40 companies cooperating with the city of Paris in order to give the places, give the roofs in order to have the startups and the social companies working on greening the city and on these agricultural, urban agriculture projects, you know. So there is a big participation, a big understanding between the city of Paris and the private companies, and we are working on a lot of projects.
We of course think about the next, the upcoming Olympic Games 2024. So I think you should of course imagine how the work should be done right now. Maybe engaging already different brands to work on that?
Yes, we have to be aware and to be cautious with greenwashing, you know, because we have a lot of big companies who want to go to the Olympic Games. I think that if we want to change the image of the Olympic Games and make these Olympic Games more sustainable, we need to have very strong projects with the sponsors and the private companies for making these games sustainable games. You know, for example, with the plastic, what are we doing with the plastic? You know that Coca-Cola is a big sponsor of the games. Toyota is a big sponsor of the games. So we need to have a strong conversation with them about electric cars against thermic cars and so on. So it's not so easy. It's something like a struggle, like a fight. But we are going in the good direction. You have seen what the mayor of Paris have said about a big sponsor, energy sponsor for the games. I think that we have to be clear in our minds and in our words in order to make these Olympic Games sustainable.
True, I'm the best. I met Tony Estanguet a few days ago, and he really wants to manage with you, with the help of the city of Paris, the most beautiful Olympic Games in the world. What is the ambition?
Olympic Games, like all these big events, are very polluting.
Yeah, sure.
So we need to redesign the strategy of these games if we want to make them sustainable.
Sure. Back to the engagement from the citizens. Welcome, Devita, once again. You lead FoodLabs in Detroit. Can you tell us more about what is FoodLabs and the different communities involved?
Let me describe and explain what FoodLab is as an organization by following this conversation and the things that I've heard in reference to what are some of the biggest challenges that are going to be facing cities in the next 5, the next 10, the next 15 years. And by answering that question, it's going to lead into what FoodLab Detroit is. Essentially, we're a nonprofit organization that provides incubation to food entrepreneurs. We help them start, scale, we provide them access to capital, a like-minded community of entrepreneurs, technical assistants, mentors, so they can take their idea of starting a food business, launch it, and then hopefully scale it. That's essentially what we are as an organization, but that doesn't explain why we do what we do. So in Detroit, I'm going to say 3 of the biggest things that I see that are impacting cities because it impacted Detroit. And this is a warning for places like Paris where everything appears to be A-OK. I come from a city that in my lifetime, in 50 years, it went from the 4th richest city in the United States of America due to the automobile industry to filing for the largest municipal bankruptcy in 2016. That happened in my lifetime. So my warning is don't think and sit on and rest on your laurels and think that it's fine and it always will be fine. If we are not paying attention to cities, 3 things to be aware of and why we do what we do at FoodLab Detroit. The 3 things is that we have to be concerned with environmental challenges that are impacting our cities. More and more and more people are going to be in cities. And so we have to be aware of some of the environmental concerns. One of the things that we've done in Detroit is that we've shut down incinerators. We're looking at the freeways, the streets, because diesel trucks are moving through our communities. Yes, delivering food into these grocery stores and supermarkets and restaurants, but this is diesel fuel that's being admitted into these communities and neighborhoods as they drive through. So environmental concerns. The second thing that we have to concern ourselves with in terms of cities is we have to concern ourselves with the resources. This is key. I can't stress this enough. In Detroit, we faced a water shutoff crisis. Water is going to be, if it is not already, the new gold currency. It is more important than oil, in my opinion. It is water. That is going to be important. And also green space and land. And if you don't have those 2 things, if you don't have land and if you don't have water, guess what you can't do? Grow food. You can't do it. And so we're very concerned about how we are being environmental stewards and how we are using our resources. And the last thing, which is so important, that we have to be aware of as more and more people move into cities is governance. Now, it's wonderful that all these great things are happening in Detroit and Paris and all over the world as it relates to cities. But the question is how are these cities being governed? And what is the process about getting community engaged in the democracy of the cities that in which they live? So in FoodLab Detroit, we are a community of over 200 small businesses. These are local entrepreneurs in communities that have been devastated due to the poor access of healthy, fresh food, which is called obesity, diabetes, and health-related issues in those neighborhoods. But the beautiful thing about what we do is that the problem is being solved by the people who are most impacted by the problem in the first place. That's the beauty of FoodLab, and it's the beauty of what we call like the small grassroots organizing, to take a challenge and a problem and have the people who are directly impacted by that come up with the solution.
But do you have the support from Detroit City? And can you tell us more?
Yeah.
It could be nice for Jean-Louis to implement such things, you know.
And you know, people ask me this question all the time when they look at the FoodLab model and the success that we have had incubating and accelerating, and we have a community of 200 members. The fact that we have gone into communities and neighborhoods that have not had sit-down restaurants. Imagine this. I arrived into Paris yesterday, and I'm sitting in a beautiful cafe, sipping on my espresso, writing in my journal. I thought, oh my God, this is so damn cliche. Like all I need now is like a scarf and a beret. And I'm like, and I'm just like living the whole Parisian scene.
Don't forget the baguette. Huh?
Oh, and a baguette, right? Oh, and no, don't forget a cigarette. But I'm gonna talk to y'all about that later. And so it was just so cliche. And so while I'm sitting there, I'm counting all of the different cafes. I mean, it's fantastic. And the little supermarkets. In Detroit, I live in a neighborhood where we are starting businesses and opening up sit-down restaurants that have not had a sit-down restaurant in that neighborhood. Watch this. In over 20, 25, in some areas, 30 years, never a sit-down restaurant. So have we had successes? Absolutely. And so people say, Devita, how in the world has FoodLab not only been so successful, but could the model work someplace else? And here's what I tell people in terms of answering your question. FoodLab is so successful because it started out of necessity. We didn't have a choice. We had to do something to feed our citizens, to bring back conviviality in our communities and neighborhoods, to build what we call and cultivate healthy communities. We had to do that. Remember, I'm from a city that filed for the largest municipal bankruptcy. Our administration, as smart as they are and as focused as they are, we're focused on ambulance. We're focused on fire trucks. We're focused on police. They were focused on safety. You think they were focused on small businesses and sustainability and entrepreneurship? No. More and more, yes, we are working hand in hand with the city because they now have a sustainability agenda. But when we started, no.
Don't forget.
One direction from you both.
Well, I'm sure that she's so right. The fact that a city is in a good shape doesn't mean that it will last for eternity. And the case of Detroit is a remarkable case. And I think that it could happen to any kind of city. Look at what's happening now in London with the Brexit. The shift is spectacular. And so I know very well that the situation of the Paris and the greater Paris is not for eternity. But don't think, for example, that it's pure capitalism, that if you have bakeries everywhere in Paris. The city of Paris is making a regulation. And also, we put money, we're funding some bakeries in some places in Paris. For example, we have 50 open markets. All these open markets are funded by the city. So it's a political strategy. It's a political investment. We are aware that the city of Paris is one of the cities with the most diverse shopping and fooding system, and we are clearly we have a clear understanding of that, the fact that it's an asset for the city. And for example, what's happening with the e-commerce, with Amazon, is a terrible threat, not only for Paris, but for all the cities in the world. If you lose your shops, you are losing your soul. So this is why we need to fight for our independent and local shops, and mainly fooding shops.
That's why we should, thank you, Jean-Louis. We should probably think more about the delivery into maybe more than 24 hours. It should be nice to wait for things before being
Yes,
delivered.
a little bit, and not H+1, you know,
Sure,
1
this
hour.
is useful. We have to conclude, but I would like to hear from you,
Yeah,
Elisabeth.
maybe just a reaction to what Devita says and about the examples of what FoodLab is doing in Detroit, which makes it very relevant for any of us and any city here in France. The key issue here is self-sufficiency, autonomy of cities, okay? And once, like if what happened in Detroit, like you don't have the money anymore, you cannot buy food from outside anymore, okay? So this is an issue for everyone. We've been conducting a study on French cities showing that the average food autonomy rate is 3%, meaning 3% only of what is eaten in the large Paris area is coming from the area, okay? So 3% in average in France, and that's the maximum is 7-8, Nantes, Angers for food, and Paris for manufactured goods, okay? So
one figure, 50 years ago, it was 70%.
Well, that's the point. So it's been going down. So if you have a crisis, then you have no money, then suddenly you discover that you need to import everything, and you don't have money to do it. Yeah. So what we need to do, and this is why FoodLab is a very relevant example even for us, is increase the autonomy of cities, the capacity to produce locally what is eaten or consumed locally. And that's where circular economy can help too.
Exactly.
So you have more sustainable business models coming in.
And I'll just say this, because I know we have to wrap up, that FoodLab, we work with food entrepreneurs and businesses, but we have partners all over the city, specifically along what we call the food system kind of chain. And the #1 organization that we work with very closely is an organization that is called Keep Growing Detroit. And I mention that because in 1987, all major grocery stores in Detroit left the city. So we didn't even have a major grocery store. And so self-sufficiency and liberation and freedom, you hit it on the nail. Last year, Keep Growing Detroit reported that in the city of Detroit alone, we had over 1,600 urban farms and gardens. Last year alone, the city of Detroit grew over 600,000 tons of its own food. Last year alone, almost 40,000 Detroiters were involved in harvest season, picking and growing and selling and giving away food that was grown right in the city of Detroit. That is what, for us, freedom looks like.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Are you staying? Are you staying at
Absolutely.
this day? So,
Yes.
if you want to share with Devita from FoodLabs, with Elisabeth at 11:30, and maybe Jean-Louis for a few minutes
Yes.
with Jean-Louis. So come on. Thank you so much. Thanks to you, and thanks to the audience for paying attention.
Thank you.
Bye.